Yo, welcome back to another video of Memoria Unit Revival. This time we have our 12th episode and we are running it through with the first ever Vanguard released into the game, that being Diablo. This will probably be my last video for this update, not last video ever, because update 11 will be out tomorrow, so expect some new videos based around update 11, and then I will be going back to, more Memoria Unit Revivals, although I might try to see if I can slot them in now and then between like the new update videos itself. Let's get into the actual video itself, and that is talking about Diablo. So Diablo is the first Vanguard unit to be released into the game in update 1.5 in the Dawn update. It was a pretty bad time in the game, low player counts kind of all around. The game mode itself was actually pretty terrible, really low currency rates that you would get out of it too. However, for myself, this was a time during the game where I actually played a ton of this game. I was kind of just not really caring about too much of the newer content that was coming into the game, which was very little because the update schedules were really slow, and I was just going through every single unit in the game, kind of maxing them out, all Z plus stats, all of that, kind of just like min-maxing my account because I am a huge collector. I liked to at least get one of everything on the account. I'm not really that big of a trader, so if I ever did miss something, I don't really try to go ahead and try to trade for it, because one of the big things when it comes to me being a big collector is I like to be the original owner of the actual like unit or character that I am going after. So if I do miss something, it is a bit unfortunate, but most of the time I do try to collect as much as I can for a nice rare account. Everything that I own on my account pretty much is all originally owned by me. I'm the one that first obtained the unit, so that is what I like to go by when it comes to being a collector on my account. I was very lucky enough to be able to actually pull Diablo back in update 1.5. I think it was actually in Steel Ball Run update. That's when I actually did get Diablo, but I grinded a ton of that event and I did eventually get him. Back then, Diablo wasn't too crazy. He was like okay because he had actually decent damage on placement. So a Monarch on Diablo was really good, but I actually never got Monarch on my Diablo until maybe a couple of updates ago. The reason why I decided to Monarch my Diablo was just because he's a trophy unit, and he's a unit that I have had in my inventory since the start, and since he's a Vanguard, I feel like he deserves to at least be a Monarch just as a nice collection standpoint. I never actually intended to really use him. He was just there as like a nice thing to have in my inventory. Now, as the title suggests, does Diavolo stand against the test of time? This is one big real question, whether or not he is actually good enough, because he got introduced into the game when passives weren't really that of a big power creep, and it was mainly like the damage numbers were the big power creep back then. The real change in when passives became the main power source for units was around maybe, I think it may have been the Bleach update or maybe even the Sid update. Before then, most of the damage or most of the power creep just came within the damage number of units. I think some specific units had really good passives back then, but most of them it was like pretty lackluster or mediocre passives, and it was really the damage number and the attack AoEs that made them good. And Diablo really does not have a good passive at all. His passive is very mediocre. It's actually pretty terrible. So all Diablo had back then was that he had a big damage number on placement, and he just had one of the highest damage numbers in the game for being a Vanguard unit. He was never meant to be a unit that would actually be usable. He was more aimed to be a trophy unit rather than a unit people would actually use, until he did get some adjustments and changes to his damage later on. Now that we have memorias in the game, will Diablo be able to shine once again, or maybe for the first time ever, or will his passives really hold him back to where he could truly be? So we'll find that out. Let's go over the team that I was running alongside him. And the team that I am running for my Diablo as our carry is my stock standard team that you have seen through majority of these episodes so far. It is a very prevalent team with Urza, Rukia, Brook, Weather Report, and Speedwagon. If you want to know more about the familiars or the memorias I'm running, or memoria options, trait options whatsoever, do check down below in the description. I do have the team layout there. So with that, let's just get into talking about Diablo, what I'm running on him. I am running using my Corruption 3 Doctor for that 10% cost reduction and mainly for just an increased range. The damage number doesn't really matter at all. It's just that range number getting him a larger range, meaning that he can attack more enemies, yada yada yada. And then we have Benimaru's Memoria with Jack of All. This is just so we can get that 30% more damage when attacking burning enemies. That pairs nicely with Weather Report, and then also 10% cost reduction from Jack of All as well. Although I will be saying next episode you might be seeing a replacement with one of these units for my stock units, and that is a Weather Report. It seems like he will be being replaced by Alucard for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. So that means instead of the Benimaru Memoria that I would be running, most likely I will be running the Alucard Memoria on some of these units unless there are better memorias for them, just because we get that 30% more damage when attacking a bleeding enemy, because the Memoria for Alucard doesn't really give him any supportive capabilities. It's more or less giving him damaging capabilities, so we can move that Memoria onto other units instead, because his supportiveness for Alucard is within his Vanguard familiar, which is quite nice. So yeah, enough of that. Yep, that is the team. Now move on to the next thing. Now, typically this part of the video, I would then go into the DPS that we would be seeing on our Diavolo. I'll just say it's around maybe 500 to 400,000 damage as his highest that he can get. It's nothing too crazy. What I want to talk about more is actually his passives and how useless they are. So on screen right now, you can see his passives that he has. He has a bit of damage in the first passive, dodging in the second passive, and then talking about his ability and what it can do in the third passive. If I were to actually simplify it and to showcase what actually his passive is doing in this exact rift that I'm doing, you can see we have the 15% damage on bosses, we have the 30% damage built up from slows, and then we just have the ability, because the slow coming from the ability after it's completed is quite useless, and the dodging and counter attacks are completely useless because there is no such thing as an attacking unit within the rift. A lot of enemies these days don't actually have any sort of attacking mechanics, unlike when they were first in the game with like the older maps and the older bosses. They were attacking units. Nowadays, nothing like that is in the game at all. Hopefully, maybe we do see it in the future, but right now it is completely useless. And as you can see, I were to simplify it, he has 45% damage in his passive, and then he has his ability. That is all this Diavolo has. Don't get me wrong though, his ability is pretty good. Walks back and gives 50% damage in range. This is actually really good. That walk back is really strong too, because it doesn't get affected by slow, which is really nice. So the enemy will actually walk back to the furthest point they can. However, the downside to that is that it is a 5-minute cooldown between that ability. And with that, that is pretty much enough of talking about Diavolo. Now we can actually talk about the performance of him in the rift. As you can see, we are against the final boss right now, and he has walked past Diablo, and we have only done 31 million damage to him. Unfortunately, Diablo just does not have the damage or the DPS to be able to handle. I feel like I did place him in probably the best spot on the map just because of his AoE. It's really bad being a pretty thin line itself, so having to work around that AoE, I just placed him in like the most straight parts so I could place him and use him as last targeting, and then eventually once the bosses did come around, I would then move to target the bosses, and hopefully he would hit the enemies too. I will say his ability is very good. Like I said before, that is probably his most redeeming factor. Outside of that, his passive is pretty much useless. It's pretty much non-existent, and like cosmic typing is also a pretty nice thing, but also kind of useless for this particular stage as well. And as you can see in the background, we have needed to get assistance from my Urza to finish off this rift. Unfortunately, Diavolo just does not have the damage to be able to handle the boss, but more or less I would say the biggest fault that he does have is his AoE. It's just really bad. If he had any sort of better AoE, I feel like he could have handled the remaining enemies and just left the boss by himself. Unfortunately, towards the end, he just ended up leaking because the enemies just have just slightly too much HP for him to be able to handle them properly. So we've needed to go to our backup plan to finish off the rift with Urza, because I still want to complete this rift. I don't want to just end up failing and then wasting my time. So yep, this is where we do have to use my first ever backup plan of using Urza in the team. And with that, we move on to the tier list and where I would be placing him. Of course, easiest assumption to make, we are definitely going to be putting him into the needs more help. Unfortunately, he just was not able to complete the rift by himself. We did need to use other units to beat the rift. However, like, he isn't too bad in the sense that he has a really good ability. I'd say that's his most redeeming factor. Everything else, like, he has okay damage. His passive is completely useless. It might as well not exist in the game, and his AoE just really isn't that good at all. Hopefully, maybe, I don't expect so because he is a very rare unit, and when it comes to trading value, he is very expensive too. That being, like, maybe potentially we could see a Memoria or a Vanguard familiar for him in the future. I highly doubt it though, because of how rare that unit actually is in the game, and not a lot of people will actually be able to use him. So I feel like he's just going to be a relic of the past, which is very unfortunate. But yeah, that is where I will be placing him in the needs more help, and he will probably stay there for a very long time. Diavolo did end up doing 13.1 billion damage, and my Urza did 1.6 billion damage. Diavolo did handle most of the rift himself. Unfortunately, he just could not finish off the rift, so we did need to bring in Urza to do so. There is that. With that being said, I appreciate it if you guys have watched this far through the video. See ya.